Now, the item shop and Deadlock can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming, not knowing what items to buy for laning and trying to figure out when exactly do you buy Counterspell. And trust me, when I say this, we've probably all been in this position of not knowing what to do. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about, well, exactly what to do, what items you should buy, what items to think about, and what items will win you the game. My name's Duck Films, an Eternus ranked player and the team analyst for Rose Syndicate, and if you're struggling with items, then this video is definitely for you. And even if you're not struggling, it's still a really good watch. But that's enough about that, let's dive straight in. Now, before we go into these small details real quick, I do want to say that most matches in Deadlock give you 12 slots after you get all of the walkers. In the modern system, you start with a base slot count and unlock additional flex capacity through objectives, especially walkers. The result is the same, you get souls and you get those slots unlocked. However, you need to justify items that are best suited for your game match. There's a lot of characters on the enemy team that you have to identify and problem solve if you're facing those characters, whether it's Viper, Haze for Metal Skin, even Return Fire, and much more. Now, I think a lot of issues that players make in this game, from if you're just picking up the game for the very first time, or people that have been playing for a while and are stuck in the same rank, is you don't know what item to buy first. If you kill the entire first minion wave and secure each of the souls, you end the lane with around 820-ish souls. After getting that first wave, typically you want to buy the item right away so that you have an item advantage on the enemy. Or you can just be on the same pace as the enemies if they're also buying. So what item exactly do you actually pick? And honestly, this is a great question that a lot of people struggle with. I think there's a couple factors you have to consider for yourself, and I like to put it into 3 separate questions to ask yourself. Do you need something to help you farm? Are you playing against a McGinnis or a Rem? McGinnis spawns turrets and you need to get rid of them quickly, or are you playing against a Rem who's empowering his troopers and it's making it a whole lot harder for you to kill? If you answered yes to this question, then it's probably easier to lean more into monster rounds because it'll help you get rid of the McGinnis' turrets and the empowered troopers a lot faster. However though, buying monster rounds in a McGinnis or Rem lane might not always be the best outcome because they might be paired up with another character that are doing a ton of damage, so you need a little bit more sustain. And that leads directly into our second question, where you're looking for items that will help you trade. If you're playing a little bit more of an aggro-sided team composition, at least for your own specific lane, characters that like to do damage, characters that like to trade, then you're looking for items that will give you a little bit more range, a little bit more burst damage, and a little bit more heal on hit. This is where you're looking at items like high velocity rounds, mystic burst, extra spirit, headshot booster, those items that help you do more damage, help you trade out damage with the enemy players a lot better, and so on. Then of course, your last question is, are you taking a lot of damage? If you're playing into characters that are doing a lot of poke damage, you're thinking about characters like Infernus, paired up maybe with a Shiv or something you need to sustain yourself in lane. Because at the end of the day, the longer you can stay in lane and get souls, the better off you are. Because if you have to reset and go back to your base, you're losing souls, you're losing time, and you're losing the possibility to roam around, help get kills and whatnot. You're losing a lot of lane pressure. This is why I always suggest players getting those sustain items first, just in the off chance that you might mess up with one of your trades and you lose too much HP so you don't have to go reset. You just have that extra reassurance of being able to stay in lane. And that's why I'm going to leave you with my personal choice of item in lane. Pretty much on every single character I play, with the exception of a couple, I always recommend getting a restorative shot, and you might be wondering why. Well, there's a couple different factors. The first factor is that it's a gun item. It helps build towards your gun spike. Depending on which character you're playing, it can be helpful in different scenarios. The other big factor as to why this item I like personally is that your next bullet will heal you based on the target you hit. So from heroes, or characters or players, whatever you want to describe them as, you get 50 healing from heroes. In lane, that's quite a lot of HP. When you think of most people's HP is around 800, 700, so getting that 50 is really nice. And from healing from NPCs or just confirming orbs, you get 20 healing every 6 seconds. And especially with the changes of max HP being reduced and everything of that, I think Restorative Shot is just overall a really good item. But on the flip side, if you're playing a really passive lane, maybe getting an item like Extra Regen where you can just roam around and rotate, collect boxes and whatnot is really good as well. but I highly encourage Resto Shot pretty much over everything in this entire game. Unless you're playing in a lane that's super aggressive, you have the ability to just dominate the lane, like if you're playing a character like Mirage, then you might lean into something else. But honestly, Restorative Shot on most characters is usually the most ideal way of, how I build my characters personally. Because like I said, the longer you can stay in lane, the better off you are, and Restorative Shot allows you to do that as well as putting a lot of pressure onto the enemy because it still does gun damage, so it's basically a win-win. And following that, I think a lot of people struggle or think it's bad to have multiple tier 1 items, and let me say that definitely isn't the case. A strong early build often starts with 2 or 3, maybe even 4 tier 1 items, but you have to keep in mind that some of the items that you're buying, the tier 1s, have to be able to build into tier 2s or tier 3s, for example. So I think it's okay if you're playing a character like 7 to buy an item like Restorative Shot, get high velocity rounds as well because they build it into opening rounds later, and getting an item like Extra Spirit because you'll need that eventually for Boundless and so on. So just understanding that certain items build into one another is a really good way to how to prioritize items. And yes, there's a ton of different examples, but that's just probably the easiest one. Now that you got a little bit of a decent understanding of your tier 1 items, let's talk a little bit about tier 2, so your 1600 items, so your first real power spike. If you're finding this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, do me a favor, hit that like button. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It greatly helps me out. Liking the video is one of the best ways, as well as hyping it. But yeah, let's continue on. But anyways, tier 2 items. So tier 2 items often define what your hero is trying to do. Are you trying to get stronger mobility options, real reset tools like slow resist, debuff reduction? Are you looking for a constant and consistent sustain? And are you looking for meaningful pressure tools, range, fire rate, conditional damage, and so on? A lot of these items can be defined by what character you're playing as. For instance, you have items like Intensifying Magazine, Kinetic Dash, Long Range, Melee Charge, Mystic Shot, just for some of the examples of gun. Then you have like Bullet Lifesteal, Battle Vest, Endurance Speed, Heal Bane, all the good items. We hopefully know a lot of the items by now, but that's pretty much it. For the most part, when it comes to tier 2 items, it's all a matter of who you're playing as. If you're playing a character that leans more into utility and support, getting a early slowing hex or getting a early spirit sap is a really good idea because it allows to put a ton of pressure into the enemies. I think a big thing that a lot of people tend to struggle on is the item Suppressor. Now, Suppressor is a very good item. However, when you're in lane, typically in lane, you can buy this item. It just matters who you're playing against, if that makes sense. If you're playing against an M1 carry in lane, getting an early Suppressor is perfectly fine. If you're not playing against an M1 carry lane, getting Suppressor outside of the laning phase is probably a better idea, because when you're in lane, you're wasting a tier 2 by buying Suppressor early. If you just wait outside of lane, you can save souls, prioritize something better, and then get Suppressor later on, depending if your character buys it or not. Another thing in a tier 2 is the green idea. You have things like Battle Vest, Bullet Lifesteal, Debuff Reducer, Return Fire, Spirit Lifesteal, Healing Booster, Trophy, Weapon Shielding, and Spirit Shielding. Right now, Spirit Shielding and Weapon Shielding are extremely good because they scale with boons and they've changed how boons work, so these items are really strong for a majority of the game. Later on, you can go more into your Spirit Res or your Bolt Res, whatever you want, but those items are very good. Reactive Barrier is an excellent item if you're playing against characters like Krill, high CC characters, Abrams, Venator, and even a character like Bebop. But a majority of the time, it's always best to buy greens before those enemies become problematic. So you're not wasting to farm up really quick to be able to buy, I don't know, an item like Heal Bane or Return Fire a little bit too late into the game. Having your greens before some of your damage items is okay, even though people might tell you otherwise. It's better to solve the problem than having to deal with it later on, if that makes sense. And while we're at it, if you have questions about items, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll try to answer all of them as best as I can. All questions are welcome to no matter what. Now again, this video isn't necessarily what you should be buying. It's a video about how you might want to buy it, a general understanding of how you should be thinking about building items. But anyways, continuing on to our tier 3s. So in tier 3s, these are probably one of your bigger spikes of the game, and I think a lot of people, or let me just answer this question now, a lot of people come up and say, when do I buy Counterspell? Now, I think Counterspell is a fantastic item pretty much all the time. There's a lot of instances where this item is useful pretty much all the time, and I think every single character and player should be buying this item. There's no reason. Yes, it was slightly nerfed. It's still fantastic of an item. It saves you from a lot of different instances. It allows you to, get extra damage, it allows you to get extra health when you perform a counterspell, so it's all fantastic. If you're playing a M1 carry, for example, and you're farming up the entire game with cultists, I think before you go into a team fight, before you're needed in a team fight and you're strong enough, you buy counterspell. Make sure you always save room. Even if, they don't have the best characters on the enemy team, having that small little instance of being able to give yourself from some type of protection from damage or an effect of an enemy ability is just a really nice thing to have. Especially if you're playing against characters like a Pocket, a Haze, a Bebop, a Lash, a Rem, anything or any character that has some instance of crowd control effect on you, being able to counterspell that is just always nice. And again, buying greens earlier than later is always a good idea because you don't have to worry about them anymore. And like I said, if you're playing an M1 carry, money isn't usually an issue for you because you farm so quickly. So just prioritizing, greens before anything else is usually a decent idea. Now, another thing to think about the tier 3 items or the 3200 items is, what is this? This is essentially your mid-game power spike in objective control items. The tier 3 is where you start winning walker fights and mid-game rotations and just running around the map. These are usually items that give you serious defensive tools, like I mentioned, Counterspell and Metal Skin, Warp Stone, those type of items. Big control or engage activities, so you're thinking big AoE, Spirit Rend, Tesla Bullets, those sort of items. And you're also thinking about Torment Pulse, as well as you have your major cooldown duration shaping, or for ability kits, you also have a ton of utility options. I think a lot of utility options are definitely slept on. For instance, Disarming Hex. Disarming Hex is completely broken. This item is beyond broken and nobody buys it for whatever reason. This item can be useful in a lot of different scenarios and affects a lot of different characters in this game, because it disarms enemy targets and reduces their bullet res. I think people only think about that it only does the disarm effect, and they don't think about the extra, which is it reduces their bullet resistance. It gives us minus 13% bullet res, and it has a 32 meter cast range, a 4.25 second duration, and has a 16-second cooldown. You can spam Disarming Hex quite a lot in a team fight and basically negate all of the damage the M1 is doing on the enemy team. You also have items like Knockdown, Silence Wave, even though it is slightly nerfed. Silence Wave is still a super strong, super broken item. You also have Surge of Power, Decay. You have all these great items in the tier 3 that a lot of people tend to sleep on, at least in the utility arsenal. I think for the most part, every single character in the game, maybe with the exception of M1 carries, should be buying some sort of utility item, whether it's Decay, Disarming Hex, Knockdown, Slowing Hex, Silence Wave. I mean, you get the idea. I think all of these items is a super necessity for a majority of the player base. Some more things to consider and think about is, do you need Shred? And if you don't know what Shred is, it's essentially shredding the resistances. You're looking for items that will do debuffs, that will allow your team and the rest of your teammates to do a ton of damage without having to worry about certain effects. These are items like Alchemic Fire, Hunter's Aura, Spirit Rend, Toxic Bullets, items that will do some sort of reduction to the resist. And again, certain characters buy certain items. If you're playing melee characters like Abrams, Billy, Yamato, even Calico into that mix as well, Hunter Aura is a very good idea if they have a ton of resist. Alch Fire if the enemy team is grouping and clumping up a lot and they're just roaming around as 6 or as 5, whatever the case may be. Alchemic Fire on certain characters is a great buy because it allows you to be in those teamfights and do a lot of pressure. Spirit Rend is also a great item because it applies an effect that grants plus 10% Spirit Lifesteal for you and your teammates, as well as doing a minus 8% Spirit Risk on shot. So these items are really good, as well as Toxic Bullets, because if there's a lot of tankiness, there's a lot of health regen. Toxic Bullets is essentially the counter to regen. Once you start understanding the little instances of what you're trying to look for and what you're trying to think about, building items becomes a whole lot easier. You just really have to think about what characters you're playing against, how they like to play, and how teams are running around the map. Again, if you understand that there's enemies clumped up together running around a 6, they have a ton of resistances, an item like Alchemic Fire is a good idea. An item like Spirit Rend is a good idea. If they have a lot of characters that have a ton of baseline regen, think about, for an example, Mo and Krill. Having an item like Toxic Bullets is a super good idea. These items do a tremendous amount of damage, and they just help you with dealing with characters that have a lot of resist. And again, if you're also playing a character that likes to buy Hunter's Aura, why exactly are you buying this item? Well, you're buying it because it does the conditional of minus 10% bullet res. Passive is that you reduce nearby enemies' bullet res and fire rate. You just have to be near them. You don't necessarily have to shoot them, you just have to be near them, so it allows you to, shred their res without you having to actually even damage them. So these items become crucial against tankier compositions. Continuing on with our tier 3 items, I want to talk about our needs or necessities. So there's a couple of necessities you want. Like I previously mentioned at the very first part of this tier 3 area is Counterspell. Counterspell is a necessity in my opinion in most games. There's a lot of instances where this item is extremely useful, and pretty much there's not really many instances where it's not needed. So it's always better to get, but you can get it a little bit later on depending on the enemy's team composition and so on. But I think another necessity is an item like Dispel Magic, because it's plus 10% Spirit Res as the, just what you get. But the active is you purge all non-ultimate negative effects currently applied to you. If any effects were removed, you heal yourself and gain a move speed bonus. So depending on what characters you're playing against, having Dispel Magic is always going to be a good option, because a majority of the characters in this game apply some sort of defect or debuff or some type of effect, essentially. So just having this is a really good idea. Again, but it's pretty self-explanatory that it's good against characters like a Furnace Mirage, Viper, but again, against pretty much every single character in this game, they're going to be applying some sort of debuff because they buy certain items that have certain effects, like Capacitor, items like Toxic Bullets, Weighted Shots. All these items can be cleansed, Arctic Blast, you get the idea. Another necessity when it comes to tier 3 items is an item like Spirit Resilience, because it's just a good overall item if they have a lot of spirit damage on their team. Another, good idea is Metal Skin. A lot of people don't buy Metal Skin. If you find yourself running into Haze, Viper, Mirage, characters that do a ton of gun damage, maybe not Mirage, but you get the idea. If you're running into this issue where you just keep dying to gun damage, instead of getting Bullet Resilience, get Metal Skin instead. Because Bullet Resilience, yes, it protects you from bullets, but Metal Skin will completely protect you from bullets. You become immune to bullets. So usually it's better to get Metal Skin over Bullet Res if you're able to pop Metal Skin and just destroy or get rid of the problem that is dealing all the bullet damage. If you pop Metal Skin, then kill the haze that's on you, you no longer have to worry about that. I think these are things you have to consider because, okay, let me put this in perspective. If the enemy team has Crippling Headshot and you have Bullet Res, your Bullet Res no longer matters. You just get shredded completely. However, if the enemy team has Crippling Headshot and you have Metal Skin, if you're getting shot by the person with Crippling Headshot, you pop Metal Skin, it doesn't matter because you become immune to bullets, so you just kill the person that is doing Crippling Headshot damage to you. It's a win-win. A lot of people have to kind of lean less away from Bullet Resilience. I'm not saying it's a bad item, but you just have other items and options that do their job just 20 times better. Again, like Metal Skin. But I think another factor you have to consider of when you buy Metal Skin and not is what bullet characters they're playing and how strong the bullet characters are. Like I said, buying greens or buying early res items are always and generally a really good idea before the problem becomes too permanent and too problematic. If you're having to rush and buy greens in the later stages of the game, when there's pretty much no farm, you don't have that pressure in lane, it can become a lot more difficult to play the game. So getting early res or getting early green res is just usually a better idea, if that makes sense. Then we come to our tier 4s or 6400 items. These are your fight-winning actives in endgame scaling. So your tier 4 items can turn a single decision into a one fight. You have didn't die buttons, massive barriers, cleanses, huge damage multipliers, and hard counter items that punish pretty much every win condition. However, if you buy 6400 items blindly, you'll waste your slot budget, and if you buy them with a purpose, you'll win games you thought were lost. So 6400 items. These items are pretty important, and you want to make sure you're buying the right items. So to put it into perspective, for your tier 4 gun items, you have a couple different options. Some characters like to buy capacitor if you're playing a character like Ivy, maybe Wraith. In those instances, going into capacitor is a good idea. You only buy armor-piercing rounds if the enemy team has items like plated or just straight bullet res. If they have metal skin, it's probably not in your best interest to buy this item, because if you pop that, you're just wasting bullets, so try to lean away from that. Crippling a headshot is pretty much always a good item in my opinion, because landing a headshot will reduce their bullet and spirit resistance and applies healing reduction. This is Shred. Minus 16% bullet res, minus 16% spirit res, and minus 35% healing reduction. So if you're playing against super tanky characters that have a lot of health sustain and a lot of regen, like for example, again I like to use this example, Mo and Krill, it's a really good idea to buy an item like Crippling Headshot. Just applying this debuff and res to everybody is a really good idea. Crushing Fist is only really built on melee characters. Frenzy is usually a good purchase on certain characters like Warden, like Lady Geist, because you want to be on low HP to gain extra stats. So again, Frenzy, only really bought on Lady Geist. Glass Cannon, I don't really like this item anymore. The item isn't as good as you might think. There's only certain cases where you'll buy it. Lucky Shot is a really nice item because it gives plus 100% bonus weapon damage, 25% chance to proc. Is really good if you're playing a late game carry and you're super far ahead. Otherwise, I would look for more utility-like items. Ricochet, really good item if enemies are super clumped or if you're playing against McGinnis or Grace. If you're not playing against those characters and the enemy isn't really roaming around as 6 stacked on top of one another, I would probably lean away from Ricochet and lean into something else. Unless you're playing a character like Mirage, like Wraith, this item allows them and helps them farm a lot faster, so they might not necessarily have to buy Cultist, but Ricochet can be useful. Silencer. Silencer is a really good item if you're playing against characters that do or use their abilities a ton. If you're playing against another M1, Silencer might not be the best option, and you might want to think about a different item. But generally speaking, Silencer is a good item because there's a lot of characters in this game that like to use their abilities to do damage. So buying Silencer into a Lash or a Pick character is a really good idea because being silenced is really big. Also, it does 25% spirit damage reduction, so just generally a good item. You also have an item like Spellslinger, which while in combat, whenever you cast an ability or item, you gain fire rate. So there's a lot of different characters that benefit from this. Characters like Lady Geist who want fire rate, and you want to be able to get your abilities back a lot faster. So characters that need reload time or need a lot of uptime with their guns, Spellslinger is very nice. Then you have an item, lastly, like Spiritual Overflow. This item is good for a majority of the characters in this game, but you have to think about what it's doing. First, it's giving plus 15% ability duration. So you want to be thinking about characters that do or use some sort of ability in the game. So these are characters like, for instance, Infernus with his Afterburn, Mirage with his Scarabs and his Mark, and just all the other items he's buying. You also have to think about a character like Viper, just for example. There's a lot of other characters, but again, just example. Also, the ability duration. It's adding time to abilities. Toxic Bullets, all those items act as abilities as well, so it'll be plus 15 with those items as well. You also gain plus 13% spirit lifesteal, which is really good as well. You also get 90 bonus health and 6 spirit power as well. You also gain bonus fire rate, spirit power, and spirit lifesteal by charging up when shooting enemy heroes. So you want to be picking this item when you're playing characters that shoot, that do a lot of damage, that are constantly shooting their gun. That's why it's good for characters like Mirage, like Infernus, like Viper, like Vindicta, because they're all shooting their gun consistently, and it's just overall aiding them in every direction. It also builds from Spirit Lifesteal, so it's another green investment that goes into gun, which is just overall a very nice thing to have, if that makes sense. So that's a little bit breakdown of the gun invest. Now let's talk about the green invest. So tier 4 greens, this is where things get a little bit confusing for some players, and the first item is Cheat Death. So Cheat Death is an item that allows you to live on 1 HP when you take lethal damage, instead become temporarily death immune and remove all non-stun debuffs. The big thing about this item is that this is a last resort item. You bought everything you need, you have 1 slot left. And if you think your impact is big enough to, win you the fight, and if you die, you're out of the game essentially, buying this item when you're super far ahead and super strong, and you feel like if you die, you lose the game, buying this item is perfectly fine. This item is a little bit of a cheese. I don't necessarily like the item in this game, but if you think your impact is big enough and you think you need to be in every single fight, having this item as a last resort is okay in my opinion. Following that, you have Colossus. A majority of the time, Colossus is a pretty good item. Usually you want to build it on characters like Geist, Warden, Venator. You can also build it on tankier characters like Billy. Basically, it gives you plus 25% base health, and it gives you plus 15% weapon damage. Generally a good idea if they're playing against a lot of buff damage. If you're playing against a lot of burst damage, you need a little bit more sustain. Having this item is a good idea because it gives you 35% bullet res and 35% spirit res, which is very nice. Also, buying it on a melee character is very nice as well because it gives you plus 30% melee damage as well. So pretty good. Divine Barrier is a very nice item. I think everybody in the game can buy it except for M1s because it just protects you from an instance, or if you're afflicted by a pocket, buying this item is a really good idea. I would only really buy this item if you're playing against the pocket. I think there's other items that do Divine Barrier that are just better than Divine Barrier, like Dispel Magic, Counterspell. But I think if you're playing against a pocket, just to guarantee yourself that you can stay in the fight after a pocket afflicts if you miss your Counterspell, having that Divine Barrier is nice. Then you move on to Divine's Kevlar. Or Diviner's Kevlar, sorry, I misspoke. I think it's only useful on a couple characters. Pocket, Yamato, it's really nice. Silver is okay. The conditional is that it grants you a 1000 barrier, and it gives you plus 35 spirit power. You have 23 seconds of this buff, and it's on a 40-second cooldown. It's also good on Mirage. It's only good in certain ways because I think once the game gets into its final stages, having this item, I think there's better tier 4s that you can buy instead of this item, especially when people are getting one-shot in the later stages of the game. People are dying super quickly. Just if you pop your ult, it's not going to do that much. You also have to think about there's a ton of shred in the game with crippling headshot, everything like that. So just going for something else and leaning in a different direction is usually the best course of action in my opinion. Moving on to Healing Tempo. So Healing Tempo is pretty good. It gives plus 25% healing effectiveness, plus 10% spirit res, plus 6 health regen, plus 4 out of combat regen. Its passive is applying heal to yourself or an ally, grants the target bonus fire rate and bonus move speed. You can build this on a lot of different characters. You can think about Ivy, Kelvin, Paige, characters like Rem that want to build Healing Tempo. You don't necessarily always want to be buying this item because there's just better ideas, but generally it's a pretty good item. I think you can buy it on certain M1 carries paired with Siphon and Vampiric Burst to be able to get a ton of healing output, but I think there's just better options for M1s in the gun department than Healing Tempo, or just better options in the tier 4 category period than anything else. I think if you need a lot of uptime and you think if you're taking a lot of damage and you're dying quite a lot, getting this item is perfectly fine. Moving on to Indom. I'm not a fan of this item. Indom is hit or miss for me. So the passive is that the next stun, chain, immobilize, sleep, or silence is automatically cleansed. When this happens, you gain a barrier, and all your ability cooldowns get reduced by 20%. It scales by spirit, with the conditional being a flat 325 barrier. It builds from reactive, which is pretty nice, so it gets reactive another, idea or instance. But I think at that point, you should just be buying Unstop instead of Indomitable, because Indomitable is a one-time use. Yeah, it's very good in certain scenarios if you're playing against a character like Mo and Krill, like a character like Holiday or even Lash, but I think you just have better items for cheaper that do a lot more than Indom. You think about Counterspell, you think about Unstoppable, so I think Indomitable, until they figure out what they want to do with this item, you should be thinking about Unstop and Counterspell more so than anything else. Moving on to Infuser. So Infuser is really good for certain characters. I would only really buy it on 7, Victor, and Infernus, because you pop it before you use abilities, or you need to pop it before you use 7 ults. You need to pop it when enemies are 100% on whatever you're doing damage with Infernus or Victor. This item is, it's good in certain scenarios, but only a couple characters really benefit from it. At least in my personal opinion. It's pretty good overall. Plus 30 spirit power, plus 70% spirit lifesteal. So again, a really decent item. Moving on to Inhibitor. Inhibitor is a very good item. It's been nerfed, but it's still very strong. It's plus 10% weapon damage, plus 150 bonus health. The passive, however, is that your bullets build up to reduce the target's outgoing damage and apply healing reduction. The keyword, reduce the target's outgoing damage. If they're playing a team composition, when you have maybe another M1 character, like a Wraith, a Haze, some other character that's doing a ton of damage and you have no way of shutting this character down, building an item like Inhib is a really good idea because they get a minus 30% damage penalty if you're managing to land your shots onto them. Pairing this item with Ricochet is a really good idea because then you're applying the outgoing damage penalty to everybody hit with Ricochet, and you're also applying the minus 40% healing reduction. So if they're playing a team composition that's doing a lot of healing, so if they have like a Rem or something, Paige, a Kelvin, characters that are healing one another, you also are playing against characters that are doing a lot of damage, having Inhib as an option is a really good idea. Typically, I wouldn't say this is your first tier 4 gun item or weapon item, but having this item ready to go as your second tier 4 is a really good idea. However, if you have a problem of them doing a ton of damage and you have no idea how to shut them down, buying Inhib first is perfectly fine. Moving on to Juggernaut. Juggernaut can be hit or miss sometimes. I personally like other items. It does build from enduring speed, which is very nice. You get plus 50% slow resist, so if you need that move speed, you need the slow res. If they have a ton of slows, you just feel like you're constantly getting slowed, then buying this item is fine. I generally don't buy this item on most characters, but I think it is a pretty good item. I just think there's better tier 4s that have higher priority over one another. If you feel like you're super far ahead, nobody can touch you, you want another tier 4 grin, then you could probably buy Juggernaut. But like I said, I think there's just better items. Following that, you have Leech. There's only a couple characters right now that buy Leech. There's just better items. But you get plus 25% Spirit Lifesteal, plus 25% Bullet Lifesteal, plus 180 bonus health, weapon damage, and Spirit Power. Overall, a decent item, but depending on what character you're playing, there's better tier 4s that just slot into better. Like, for example, Infuser, you just get more Lifesteal because, Infuser is only for Spirit Lifesteal. Leech grants you both, so if you're playing a character that benefits from both Bullet and Spirit Lifesteal, maybe like Mirage, for example, although it's not the best pick right now, Mirage is a decent idea of how you would buy this item because they're doing both instances of damage. Moving on to Phantom Strike. Phantom Strike is only useful on a couple characters, Billy, Abrams, Silver, Mo. You can build it on Haze if you want to, and a couple other characters. But basically, you're only really using this to get rid of flyers like Vindictor, Ray Talon, or you're trying to jump onto the enemy's backline as quickly as possible. Then this item is rather useful because it does a minus 50% boost speed and it gives a disarming status effect. However, you do have to understand that if you're Phantom Striking into the enemy's backline, they're probably going to be turning around for you. So this is something you have to be aware of. But yeah. Plated Armor. Plated Armor is really good. If you're playing against characters that do like dot damage, which is damage over time, so characters that have to build up something, like build up a mark, so Infernus, Mirage, Mina, Viper, Haze with toxic bullets, those type of items. This item is very good on those, those characters. However, once they start buying crippling headshot and armor piercing rounds, then plated doesn't get really any value. That's why I like to emphasize metal skin is a very good tier 3 item that you should prioritize if they're playing those certain characters that do a ton of gun damage, and they already have crippling and they have armor piercing rounds. Then plated armor isn't necessarily a necessity because metal skin will just do plated armor's job a whole lot better. If you're able to use metal skin, have it popped for 24 seconds, be able to kill that enemy within, 5-second duration. If you're able to kill that enemy within 5 seconds, then metal skin is a really good pick. If you're not able to kill the enemy in 5 seconds, then you can lean more towards plated and just try to out-sustain, even though it's really hard if they're running crippling and armor piercing round, but that's just an idea. Moving on, we have Siphon Bullets. Siphon Bullets is a very good item. You get plus 15% weapon damage, plus 10% bullet resistance, and your bullets temporarily steal max HP from enemies. Enemies regen their stolen health when the debuff expires. Now, typically, you have to think about this. Your bullets typically steal max HP, so you really only want to be buying this item when the enemies are extremely tanky, for example, like Mokrilla, Abrams, Billy, that sort of team composition. When they're tanky, having an item like Siphon Bullets and you need to sustain yourself, having this item is very good. I mean, there's some cases where you can buy it, but most of the time you just want to prioritize other items in the tier 4 category if you're playing an M1 carry. Again, I'm not saying Siphon's bad at all. It's a very good item, but typically you only want to be buying it against tankier enemies so you get a lot more value. Moving on, we have Spellbreaker. So Spellbreaker is plus 18% Spirit Res, plus 25% debuff resistance, bonus health, and the next instance of high spirit damage you take is significantly reduced. 65% spirit damage reduction. So there's a couple of characters you want to be buying this for. If enemies have Spirit Burn, or, are this super annoying, think about Pocket, Great Talon, Lash, Paradox. Paradox with Double Bomb, Lash with Slam, and Pocket just with the amount of damage Pocket does. Great Talon also pretty good. Having that item in those instances are pretty good. Otherwise, I would probably lean to other Spirit Res items. Counterspell, Spirit Resilience, just those two together will help you a lot in those instances, especially for the characters you're buying it for. You can get away with buying Counterspell plus Spirit Res, those two together, instead of Spellbreaker, but you have to think about that you're trading 2-for-1 items, so honestly, that choice is up to you. I generally lean away from Spellbreaker unless, it's a really big problem, like if I'm getting a one-shot by a Lash ult or Pocket or a Great Talon, then you can consider Spellbreaker. But otherwise, I would lean Counterspell, Spirit Res. Moving on to Unstoppable. I mean, Unstoppable is always a good item on most characters. I don't think there's a character I wouldn't buy it on, especially for mid-boss fights, because if you're able to pop Unstop and get into the mid-boss and you're trying to steal from the enemy team, having this item is really good. It also builds from Debuff Reducer, which is just really nice because it gives you plus 25 debuff resist. And Debuff Reducer builds into Spellbreaker and Unstop, but I would always build Unstop over the other, over Spellbreaker, because I think there's just so many instances where Unstop is such a nice thing to have. So buying the tier 2 Debuff Reducer pretty early on into most games is definitely a good idea. So I would definitely recommend trying to get Unstop whenever you can for most time. I think having it before mid-boss fights, like I've been saying, this is a really good idea. Moving on to Vampers. Vampers, always a good buy in most ideas, especially on any Mouse 1 character. Characters like Venator, Geist, I'm not really Geist, but you get the whole idea. Most M1 carries, because it gives you bullet lifesteal, bullet res, bonus health, weapon damage, and it grants lifesteal, fire rate, and ammo, which is very nice. It's essentially the infuser for gun, is the best way to describe it. It's Gun's Infuser, because it's the same exact stats as Infuser, but just flipped to bullet. So it's very good for certain characters in certain conditions, so those are things you want to keep in mind. Then you have Witchmail. So Witchmail gives you plus 22% Spirit Res and plus 14 Spirit Power. So taking heavy hits of Spirit damage from an enemy reduces a random ability cooldown. Basically, you want to buy this on a certain characters, that's like Abrams. You can buy it on Silver if you want to, but it's essentially like Abrams' character, right? That is for Abrams, essentially. Is most of the time what you're building it on. It's a decent item. I would prioritize other items, but if you're playing a character like Abrams, yeah, you can lean into it. But like I said, lean into other items. I would say like Spellbreaker if you need the Spirit Res for sure. Now moving on to our tier 4 spirits. Yeah, a lot of talking. Arctic Blast, pretty good item on a majority of the characters, depending on who you're playing. If you're playing against character, or if you're playing as a character that wants to lock people down, like a Calico, you can even throw Billy into the mix as well, or Armina. Having this item is very nice because basically it also brings down flying targets. So if you can jump up, grab them, and bring them down, it's a really good idea. Boundless overall, just a good item because you do a ton of extra spirit power. It's a big damage spike for a lot of the characters like Great Talon and so on. Curse is a very good item, although they slightly nerfed it to more damage penalty. Curse is just really good because it shuts down a lot of ultimates. It shut down pretty much everything in the game, so it's all a really good idea. Echo Shard is a really good idea. You just throw 2 instances of one ability cast, so double knife or however you want to use Echo Shard, really good idea. But I will say escalating exposure is the big one. And basically you get minus 8% spirit res on spirit damage and plus 17% spirit resistance. Dealing spirit damage applies a stacking spirit imp that increases your spirit damage to the target. So if the enemy has a ton of spirit resistance, or if you're playing a character that has a lot of AoE, building escalating exposure is a really good idea because it allows you to shred through those enemies quite quickly. Again, we're talking about shred, which is good. Then you have an item like Ethereal Shift. Ethereal Shift is very good if they have a lot of instances of high burst damage or high CC abilities. If you're playing in those type of scenarios, buying Ethereal Shift is a really good idea. Most characters will benefit from this, especially if you're playing an M1 carry and you need to live. Having this as an item is really good because afterwards you gain spirit power, move speed, and spirit res. So if the enemy team is building a lot of spirit items or they're spirit heavy team, having an item like Ethereal Shift is a really good idea. Following that, you have Focus Lens. It builds from Spirit Stab. There's a couple characters that benefit from buying it, but you target an enemy to silence them, and a portion of the damage dealt during the silence gets applied to the target when the silence wears off. So characters that do high amounts of burst damage, you want to be thinking characters like Calico, Mina, maybe even Haze, benefit from Focus Lens because it grants them plus 10% fire rate so that you can unload a mag while they're Focus Lens, and then they apply the damage after. So a really good idea. Moving on, you have Lightning Scroll. Lightning Scroll is only really useful for characters like 7. You can throw a cheeky little Vindicta Lightning Scroll in there as you want to. Ivy, because you want the max amount of use for this item. So using those characters that will do a tremendous amount of AoE or the ability to really benefit from those items is what you really want to be thinking about. Then you have Magic Carpet. Magic Carpet is an interesting one because you get the plus 25% air control and minus 15 gravity scale. So there's only a couple characters that benefit from this right now. Those are characters like Lash, Celeste. I would probably only say maybe a little bit of a Monocryl, but those are generally the characters I would say benefit the most from it. I think this is like a last item buy. Maybe you could buy a little bit earlier if you really want to get rid of the flyers and you're just having like a really bad time playing against them. That's when I would buy it at least. Then moving on, we have Mercurial Magnum. Good on a certain amount of characters if you're buying Quicksilver Reload. So characters like Haze, Viper, so on. Warden. Basically, you imbue an ability charge up over time with bonus spirit power, bonus fire rate, and reload your bullets on use until your next reload. Your bullets deal bonus spirit damage based on your spirit power. So if you're playing a character that builds both gun damage items and spirit damage items, having Mercurial Magnum is really nice. So Viper, for example, some of her abilities scale on spirit, so you might lean a little bit more spirit. Having this item is really good. Mystic Reaver, really good item. The characters I would buy it on though are characters like Paradox if you're doing the Carbine build, Great Talon on his arrow. What else is there? I mean, I guess Apollo on his Flawless Advance, which is his 3, and some other characters. I wouldn't necessarily buy it on Shiv, although people will say, oh, you need it on Shiv. I like buying Infuser on Shiv because I think overall it's just better to have. You get a lot more lifesteal. You lose a little damage, it's whatever, but you gain a lot more sustain, which is just overall really nice. So Refresher. Refresher is an interesting one. So Refresher, in my opinion, is useful for some characters in this game, not all of them. If you're playing a character that has a game-defining ultimate, right? So think of a Dynamo, a Lash, a Yamato, if you're super strong ahead, or some other characters. If you think your ultimate is generally the way you're going to win fights, then buying Refresher is perfectly fine. If you don't think your ultimate is going to turn a fight, or you don't think it's useful, then don't even consider buying it. Like if you're playing like an M1 carry, for example, you don't need to buy Refresher. But if you're playing a character that you think will win you the game, like a Dynamo, like a Lash, then buying, or a Pocket, then buying Refresher is fine. Generally speaking, Refresher is usually one of your last items, but you can lead into it a little bit earlier on if you want to secure wins quickly. Moving on to Scourge. Scourge is still completely overpowered, completely strong, 100 bonus health, plus 17% debuff resistance as its passive. You get a spirit resist and aura on a friendly target that deals damage to enemies proportional to their max health. It can be self-cast. Max health per scale is 3.5%, and it's a plus 40% spirit res on its conditional. It's always a good item pretty much in every single case scenario. I don't think there's an instance where you don't want to buy this item. The item's still completely broken, no matter what people say. It's just really good. Moving on to Spirit Burn. If the enemies have a ton of Spirit Resilience, or a ton of Spirit Res, buying Spirit Burn is a really good idea. There's a lot of characters that build Spirit that benefit from it, so just having Spirit Burn, again, a good idea. Transcendent cooldown. If you have a ton of active items and you need your abilities up quickly, getting Trans CD is very good. Like I said, if you have a ton of active items, if you're playing a character like a support, so like Rem, like Paige, Kelvin, Viscous, having Transcendent cooldown is a very good idea. Moving on to Vortex Web. Vortex Web is really good. You throw a vacuum grenade, pulling all enemies into a small area and applying slow hex. So if you're playing characters that abilities essentially get amplified when enemies are clumped together, it's generally a good buy. So this is characters like Rem, like Paradox. Not Rem, sorry, like Paige, like Paradox. Characters that want people up in a close circle to get maximum hit with their utility. For example, with Paige, you would use a Vortex Web, and then you would use your Sword Stun, whatever it's called. If you're using a Paradox, you would throw a Bomb, Vortex Web, Bomb, Ult, do all that stuff. Or if you're playing with a team that synergizes well with a Vortex Web, for instance, if you're playing with a Lash and people are hiding, popping a Vortex Web, pulling them so your Lash can ult, or even a Dynamo can ult, is a really good idea. You have to think about the synergies when you're also building items. All of these items aren't necessary just for yourself, you also have to think for the rest of your team, if that makes sense. If you're a support, you might want to build Scourge to pop on one of your frontliners so that your frontliner can build a different item instead of having to build Scourge. This is something you should be thinking about, not necessarily in the lower ranks, but eventually when you get into the higher ranks, you want to start thinking about how can I build items for my teammates as well as for myself just to win the game. So thinking more outside the box is definitely just a better way to go approach this game. Now, a little something that a lot of people, forget about is the investments. People talk about, oh, you need to get your 4.8 gun spike, you need to get your 4.8k spirit, vitality, 1.6, all that stuff. So basically, with universal slots, they matter because you spend in each category. So weapon investment, vitality investment, and spirit investment. So weapon investment generally increases your weapon damage scaling and gun performance. Vitality increases survivability scaling, so health and relatable defensive value. And spirit increases spirit power scaling, so abilities and such. So if you buy an 800, soul item and later upgrade into a different item, your investment shifts to the category and cost of the items you now own. That means upgrade decisions can change your investment spikes. A practical example is if you start with a 800 vitality piece item and later upgrade into, a 1600 weapon item because the upgraded version is weapon category, you didn't change your toolkit, you changed your investment tools. But the 4.8k spike concept is why builds feel suddenly stronger. So with extra bonus values at that row, you'll often feel suddenly my damage is real or suddenly I can survive the dive. Basically, you need to buy items with, set category. Building into those weapon investments, or building into those vitality investments and spirit, this allows you to do a lot more damage and survive a lot longer. So try to get your 4.8k vitality spike early or your gun spike early is what matters in this game. If you're able to reach those spikes before the enemies, you're already a lot stronger. Meaning, if you're hitting those spikes, you can easily take fights and overwhelm the enemy. That's why people emphasize in getting to your spikes or whatever the case may be before you take a fight. So these are basically what we want to be thinking about. But anyways, that was a rather long video talking a little bit about itemization in this game, talking about what to prioritize, items to think about, all that jazz. If this video helped you in any way, shape, or form, or if you're looking for more specific ideas with certain items or certain characters, do let me know in the comments down below. And if you would like to see a video about certain characters or what you should be thinking about what items, again, let me know in the comments down below as well. If you like this type of video or want to see more, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. It's one of the best ways of helping me out. It really, truly does help me out a ton. But anyways, I hope you have a great and safe day, and I'll catch you in the next one.